The school wanted my son expelled, until his genius IQ exposed the billionaire who left us behind. I need to speak. The small voice cut through the tense silence of the Westridge Academy boardroom, causing every head to turn toward the lanky 16-year-old who had suddenly risen from his chair. Principal Donovan's gavel froze mid-air. "Young man, this is highly irregular. Please sit down while we deliver our verdict. Before you expel me," Elijah Winters continued, his voice trembling but determined, "there's something you should know about my research and about Richard Harlow." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. In the plaintiff's seat, Preston Harlow's confident smile vanished, replaced by a look of barely contained panic. Across the aisle, Marilyn Winters' eyes widened in surprise, her hand reaching instinctively for her son. "Have you ever watched someone with power try to destroy someone without it? Have you felt that helpless rage when the system is rigged against you? What would you do if the family of the man who walked away from you years ago was now trying to destroy your child's future?" Today, I'm sharing the story of how a single mother librarian and her genius son took on one of America's most powerful families and uncovered a secret that would change everything. 24 hours earlier, Marilyn Winters stood frozen in the doorway of Westridge Academy's administrative office, the words of Principal Donovan still ringing in her ears. "Mrs. Winters, I'm afraid we have no choice but to recommend expulsion. The board meets tomorrow morning to make their final decision." Her 16-year-old son, Elijah, sat slumped in a chair beside the principal's desk, his lanky frame folded in on itself, eyes fixed on the floor. The boy who once lit up rooms with his brilliant mind and quick smile now seemed to be disappearing before her eyes. "There must be some mistake," Marilyn managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Elijah would never cheat on an exam." Principal Donovan slid a folder across his polished mahogany desk. "The evidence is quite clear. The advanced physics exam answers match Dr. Harlow's private solution key exactly, including the intentional error he plants to catch cheaters. Only someone with access to his office could have obtained this." "I didn't do it," Elijah said quietly, speaking for the first time since she'd arrived. "Mom, I swear." Marilyn studied her son's face, the face she knew better than her own. In 16 years of raising him alone, she had learned to read every nuance of his expressions. What she saw now was not guilt, but a bone-deep weariness that frightened her more than any accusation. "I believe you," she said firmly, turning back to Principal Donovan. "And I'll prove it." The principal's expression softened slightly. He had known Marilyn for years, first as the school's most dedicated librarian, then as a single mother struggling to keep her gifted son in an academy far beyond their financial means after her husband's abandonment. "Marilyn, I understand this is difficult, but the scholarship board is particularly strict about academic integrity. With the evidence we have," he trailed off, the implication clear. "Without that scholarship, there was no way she could keep Elijah at Westridge. On a librarian's salary, the $45,000 annual tuition might as well be $1 million. 24 hours, she said, gathering her purse with trembling hands. "Before that board meeting, I'll show you why my son doesn't need to cheat on any exam." Outside in the parking lot, the late October air bit through her thin cardigan. Elijah walked silently beside her, his shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. "Talk to me," she said once they were in their aging Honda. "What really happened?" Elijah leaned his head against the window, his breath fogging the glass. "It doesn't matter what I say. They've already decided I'm guilty." "It matters to me," Marilyn insisted, turning to face him fully. "Always." Something in her voice reached him. He straightened slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived at the school. "Someone set me up, Mom. I think I know who, but I can't prove it." His voice cracked. "And even if I could, it wouldn't matter. Not against a Harlow." The name hung between them like a storm cloud. Dr. James Harlow, brilliant physicist, Westridge Academy's most celebrated faculty member, and brother of tech billionaire Richard Harlow, whose generous donations had built half the campus, and father of Preston Harlow, Elijah's longtime rival since they'd both entered Westridge as freshmen. "Preston," Marilyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Elijah nodded. He's hated me ever since I corrected him in Dr. Kessler's class freshman year. But it got worse after the MIT summer program chose me instead of him. Marilyn started the car, her mind racing. We need to think this through carefully. If Preston planted that exam key. It doesn't matter, Elijah interrupted, a bitter edge to his voice she'd never heard before. His uncle practically owns the school. His father is on the board. Who's going to believe the scholarship kid over a Harlow? The defeat in his voice broke something in Marilyn's heart. This brilliant boy who had overcome so much, the father who walked out when he was 7, the financial struggles, the nights she'd found him studying by flashlight because he was afraid their electric bill was too high, now faced losing the education that was his ticket to a better future. All because someone with power had decided he didn't belong. I believe you, she said again, pulling out of the parking lot with newfound determination. And by tomorrow morning we're going to make sure everyone else does too. As they drove home to their small apartment on the unfashionable side of Oak Ridge, Marilyn's mind was already formulating a plan. It would require calling in every favor, using every resource, and perhaps crossing lines she'd never crossed before. But for her son, there was nothing she wouldn't do. What she didn't realize was that this fight would uncover secrets buried for nearly 17 years. Secrets that would shake the foundations of Westridge Academy and force her to confront the man who had walked away from their family without a backward glance. The man whose shadow had shaped their lives in ways she never imagined. Marilyn's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the door to their apartment. The building was decent but aging. A far cry from the sprawling Harlow estate on Oak Ridge Heights where Preston and his father lived in the shadow of Richard Harlow's technological empire. I'll make some tea, she said, trying to inject normalcy into a day that had spun wildly out of control. As the kettle heated, Marilyn found herself staring at the collection of framed photos on their refrigerator. Elijah at 8, proudly holding his first science fair trophy. Elijah at 12, being presented with the State Mathematics Award. Elijah last summer, standing awkwardly in MIT's Great Dome courtyard, looking simultaneously terrified and exhilarated on his first day of the prestigious summer program. Each image captured a milestone in her son's remarkable journey, a journey that now hung in the balance because of an accusation she knew in her bones was false. Mom! Elijah's voice pulled her back to the present. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Where you get really quiet and look like you're planning to take on the world single-handedly. Despite everything, she smiled. Maybe I am. Their apartment felt smaller than usual that evening, the walls closing in as Marilyn spread her research across the kitchen table. Elijah sat across from her, his laptop open, dark circles under his eyes. Tell me everything about Dr. Harlow's exam, she said, pushing a mug of tea toward him. Every detail matters. Elijah took a sip, gathering his thoughts. It was the midterm for advanced theoretical physics. Only 6 students in the class, me, Preston, and 4 seniors. The exam was scheduled for yesterday at 2 p.m., but when we arrived, Dr. Harlow said he needed to make last-minute adjustments and rescheduled for this morning. And the accusation is that you somehow accessed his office between yesterday and today to steal the answer key? Elijah nodded. Which is impossible because I was at chess club until 5:30. Then you picked me up and we went straight to Grandma's for dinner. We didn't leave until after 9, and the school is locked by then. Marilyn made a note. We need to document that alibi. What about this morning, before the exam? I went straight to the library to study. Ms. Patel can confirm I was there from 7:30 until class started at 9. Another note. And the exam itself? Anything unusual? Elijah hesitated. Actually, yes. There was one question about quantum entanglement that seemed off. The parameters didn't make sense with the current models we've been studying. I almost wrote that in my answer, but then I figured it might be a test to see if we'd apply the theoretical framework Dr. Harlow's been developing. Marilyn looked up sharply. The intentional error he mentioned? Maybe. But Mom, here's the thing. I've been working on my own approach to quantum field theory for my independent study project. The solution I came up with for that problem used my method, not anything from the textbook or Dr. Harlow's lectures. So your answer shouldn't match his key exactly, Marilyn said, excitement building. Exactly. But Principal Donovan said my answers matched perfectly, including the error. Elijah leaned forward. Someone copied the key and submitted it under my name. It wasn't even my work. Marilyn's librarian mind, trained to catalog and connect information, began assembling the pieces. We need to see your actual exam paper, and we need to know who had access to Dr. Harlow's office during those hours. Preston, Elijah said immediately. His father has a key to all the faculty offices for emergency board matters. Everyone knows he uses it to check out the exams in advance. That's a serious accusation, Marilyn cautioned. It's the truth. Ask anyone except the teachers, who can't afford to notice. The bitterness was back in his voice. The Harlows own this town, Mom. They always have. Something in his words triggered a memory Marilyn had long suppressed. Richard Harlow, before he was a tech billionaire, before he'd returned to Oak Ridge as its conquering hero. Back when he was just Richie, the brilliant but arrogant young physicist who'd swept into her life during her first year as Westridge's librarian. Boston, 1999. The library was quiet that evening, most students having left for Thanksgiving break. Marilyn was shelving returns when she heard the door open, followed by footsteps too confident to belong to a student. "Excuse me," a deep voice said behind her. "I'm looking for Feynman's lectures on physics. The complete set." She turned to find herself face to face with a man about her age. Late 20s, with intense dark eyes and the kind of smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "Special collections, East Wall," she replied professionally. "I can show you. I'd appreciate that." He extended his hand. Richard Harlow, visiting lecturer in theoretical physics. Marilyn Edwards, head librarian. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Head librarian? You seem young for the position." "I seem a lot of things," she replied coolly. "The books are this way, Dr. Harlow." He followed, chuckling. "Not doctor yet. Still finishing my PhD at MIT. Just filling in for Dr. Abernathy while he's on sabbatical." As she located the volumes he needed, Richard leaned against the shelves, studying her with undisguised interest. "You don't seem impressed by my MIT credentials," he observed. "Most people in this town practically genuflect when they hear where I'm studying." "Perhaps because I went to Harvard," she replied, unable to resist the small jab. "We tend to be less easily impressed." His laugh was genuine this time. "Touché, Ms. Edwards. Harvard, really? Masters in Library Science. Before that, English literature at Wellesley. Beauty and brains," he murmured, then had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry, that was condescending." "Yes, it was." She handed him the books. "Anything else you need, Dr. Almost Harlow?" His smile turned rueful. "Apparently, a lesson in how to make a better first impression. Would you consider giving me that lesson over dinner tomorrow night?" Marilyn should have said no. She had a policy against dating faculty members, even visiting ones. But something about his self-deprecating recovery from his initial arrogance intrigued her. "I close the library at 7, she said finally. "Don't be late." "Mom? Mom, are you listening?" Elijah's voice snapped Marilyn back to the present. She blinked, the memory of Richard Harlow's young face fading from her mind's eye. "Sorry, honey. Just thinking about something." She refocused on her notes. "So we need to prove you couldn't have accessed the exam key, and ideally prove that Preston did." Elijah nodded, then hesitated. "Mom, there's something else. Something weird happened after the exam." "What do you mean?" "Dr. Harlow asked me to stay behind. He said he wanted to discuss my independent project, the one Dr. Chun is mentoring me on. But then Preston's dad showed up, and they started arguing in the hallway. I couldn't hear everything, but Mr. Harlow said something like, 'Richard wouldn't approve of this,' and Dr. Harlow said, 'Richard doesn't get a say in how I run my classroom.'" Marilyn's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Richard's name. "Did they know you could hear them?" "I don't think so. They stopped when they saw me waiting. Dr. Harlow just said we'd talk another time, and I left." Elijah frowned. It was strange. Almost like they were arguing about me specifically, not just the exam. If you've ever had to stand up against someone with more power or resources than you, hit that like button right now. I want to hear your stories in the comments. Marilyn's mind was racing now, connecting dots she'd spent 16 years keeping separate. Could it be possible that James Harlow suspected something about Elijah's parentage? Had Richard ever mentioned their brief relationship to his brother? No, that was impossible. Richard had left Boston before she even discovered she was pregnant. He'd never known about Elijah, and she'd made sure to keep it that way, even creating the fiction of a husband who'd abandoned them when Elijah was 7. Old enough to have some memories, but young enough that they'd be vague and malleable. Mom, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, she had. I'm fine, just thinking about our next steps. She glanced at the clock. 8:30 p.m. We need allies, people who might have seen something or know something that could help us. Elijah considered this. Dr. Kessler has never liked the Harlows much. And Ms. Patel in the library has always been kind to me. Good. I'll speak with them first thing tomorrow. Marilyn hesitated, then added, Is there anyone else who might have been in the science building yesterday afternoon? Someone who might have seen Preston or his father near Dr. Harlow's office. The janitor, Mr. Reyes. He's always there after hours, and he sees everything. Elijah managed a small smile. He lets me use the physics lab sometimes when I stay late. Says it reminds him of when he was young and wanted to be a scientist before life got in the way. Marilyn added his name to her list. Perfect. Now, about your independent research project. Do you have documentation? Notes, drafts, anything that shows you've been developing your own approach to quantum theory? Elijah's expression brightened for the first time that evening. He pulled a worn notebook from his backpack. Everything's in here. I've been working on it since last summer at MIT. Dr. Chun there said it showed real promise. That's why she's been mentoring me remotely. Dr. Chun? From the MIT physics department. Marilyn asked, impressed. Yeah, we video chat every other Sunday. She says my approach to quantum field unification might actually solve some of the problems in current models. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. It's probably nothing. But Marilyn recognized the look in his eyes, the same brilliant light she'd seen in another pair of eyes long ago. The pure joy of discovery, of pushing boundaries others couldn't even see. It's not nothing, she said firmly, and it might just save your future. As Elijah showed her his notebook, explaining concepts that went far beyond her understanding, Marilyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. This boy, her brilliant, kind, hard-working son, deserved every opportunity. She would not let privilege and power steal his future, even if it meant confronting the past she'd tried so hard to forget. Boston, 2000. You're what? Richard stared at her across the small table in his apartment, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Pregnant, Marilyn repeated, her voice steady despite her racing heart. About 8 weeks. She'd debated whether to tell him at all. Their relationship had been intense but brief. 4 months of intellectual sparring and passionate reconciliations. She'd known from the beginning that he was leaving Boston once the semester ended, returning to MIT to complete his doctorate before joining a prestigious tech startup in California. There had never been promises of forever. Just now, Richard set down his cup carefully. Are you certain it's mine? The question stung, though she'd half expected it. Yes. He ran a hand through his dark hair, his brilliant mind visibly calculating, assessing, planning, as it always did when faced with an unexpected variable. This complicates things, he said finally. I'm not asking you to change your plans, Marilyn said, her pride rising to protect her from the pain of his reaction. I just thought you had a right to know. What are you planning to do? Keep it. Raise it. She met his gaze directly. With or without your involvement. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or surprise at her certainty. Then his expression shuddered. Marilyn, you have to understand. I'm on the verge of something extraordinary. This startup is going to change everything. The work we're doing in quantum computing will revolutionize technology as we know it. I understand, she said quietly. My life is about to become incredibly demanding. 18-hour days, constant travel. I can't be a father right now. He hesitated. But I can provide financial support, of course. I don't want your money, Richard. Don't be proud. A child is expensive. This isn't about pride. It's about clarity. Marilyn stood, gathering her coat. I needed to know where we stand, and now I do. I'll raise this child on my own terms, not as an obligation you fulfill with monthly checks and occasional guilty visits. That's not fair, he protested, rising as well. I'm trying to be responsible. No, you're trying to solve a problem. But this isn't a problem, Richard. It's a life. My life. And soon our child's life. Marilyn, wait. But she was already walking toward the door, her decision made. She would return to her hometown of Oak Ridge, where her mother still lived. She would build a life there, a good one, for herself and her child. Without Richard Harlow. Morning arrived too quickly. Marilyn had barely slept, spending hours making calls, sending emails, and formulating their strategy. By 6 a.m., she was already dressed in her most professional outfit. A navy blue dress she saved for special occasions, paired with the pearl earrings her mother had given her for her college graduation. Today, she needed every ounce of confidence she could muster. Ready? She asked Elijah, who looked equally exhausted but determined in his school uniform. He nodded, clutching his notebook and a USB drive containing all his research. As I'll ever be. The drive to Westridge Academy was silent, both lost in their thoughts. The campus looked particularly imposing in the early morning light. All Gothic architecture and old money, a place built by and for families like the Harlows. Not families like theirs. Their first stop was the library, where Ms. Patel confirmed that Elijah had indeed been studying there from 7:30 until his exam. He's always my first visitor, she said warmly. Most reliable student we have. Next came Dr. Kessler, the chemistry teacher, who didn't hesitate to provide a written statement about Elijah's character and academic integrity. That boy has never needed to cheat a day in his life, she said firmly. And between us, I've had my suspicions about the Harlow boys' work for years. By 8:30, they had gathered statements from 3 teachers, the chess club advisor, and, most crucially, Mr. Reyes, who confirmed seeing Preston Harlow entering the science building with a key card at 6:15 p.m. the previous evening, long after students should have left. He didn't see me behind the supply closet door, Mr. Reyes said, his weathered face creased with concern. I wouldn't normally speak up, Mrs. Winters, but Elijah is a good boy. He helps me practice my English sometimes. He doesn't deserve this. Armed with their evidence, Marilyn and Elijah arrived at the administrative building at 8:45, 15 minutes before the disciplinary board was set to meet. Principal Donovan met them in the hallway, surprise evident on his face. Marilyn, the board isn't seeing statements until... This can't wait, she interrupted, handing him the folder of evidence they'd collected. Before you make any decisions, you need to see what we've found. He hesitated, then nodded, gesturing them into a small conference room. Wait here. I'll speak with the board members who have already arrived. The minutes crawled by as they waited. Elijah paced the room, his nervous energy palpable. What if it's not enough? He whispered. What if they've already decided? Before Marilyn could answer, the door opened. Principal Donovan entered, followed by 3 board members in expensive suits, and Dr. James Harlow himself, his aristocratic features set in a scowl. Mrs. Winters, Dr. Harlow said coldly, I understand you're accusing my nephew of framing your son. That's a serious allegation. Marilyn met his gaze steadily. No more serious than falsely accusing my son of cheating. Principal Donovan cleared his throat. We've reviewed your evidence, Marilyn. While it raises some questions, it's not conclusive. Mr. Reyes's statement is concerning, but Preston claims he returned to retrieve a textbook he'd forgotten. Convenient, Marilyn said. Furthermore, Dr. Harlow interjected, the fact remains that Elijah's exam answers match my solution key exactly. including an intentional error only someone with access to my private notes would know. This was the moment Marilyn had prepared for. May I see the exam in question? And your solution key? After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Harlow produced both documents from his briefcase. Marilyn handed them to Elijah, who studied them intently. This isn't my handwriting, he said immediately. And these aren't my answers. I approached the quantum entanglement problem completely differently. Dr. Harlow scoffed. A convenient claim after the fact. One I can prove, Elijah countered, his voice gaining strength. He opened his notebook to a page dated 3 months earlier. This is my approach to quantum field unification. I've been developing it since last summer under Dr. Chen's mentorship at MIT. He pointed to a series of equations. If I had answered that question, I would have used this framework, not the standard model in your key. The approach is completely different. Dr. Harlow's expression changed as he examined the notebook, professional curiosity momentarily overriding his skepticism. This is unusual. Where did you learn this approach? I developed it myself, based on inconsistencies I found in current models. Elijah hesitated, then added, Dr. Chan said it shows promise for resolving the quantum gravity problem. A murmur went through the room. Dr. Harlow looked genuinely startled. Mei-chan is mentoring you? From MIT. Elijah nodded. We can call her if you'd like confirmation. Principal Donovan looked increasingly uncomfortable. This is all very interesting, but it doesn't definitively prove. There's more, Marilyn interrupted. She turned to Dr. Harlow. The exam paper you're holding, that's not my son's handwriting. But I suspect if we compared it to Preston's, we'd find similarities. That's absurd, Dr. Harlow began, but one of the board members, a silver-haired woman Marilyn recognized as Judge Eleanor Blackwell, held up her hand. Actually, I'd like to see that comparison, she said firmly, and I'd like to hear more about this research project. If Elijah has been developing original theoretical work at this level, it seems highly unlikely he would need to cheat on an exam covering more basic concepts. The atmosphere in the room shifted. For the first time, Marilyn felt a glimmer of hope. Judge Blackwell had been a friend of her mother's, one of the few people in Oak Ridge who had welcomed Marilyn back without judgment when she'd returned pregnant and alone. Dr. Harlow's jaw tightened. This is a waste of time. The evidence of cheating is clear. Is it? Judge Blackwell challenged. Because what I'm seeing is a rush to judgment against a student with an impeccable record, based on evidence that could easily have been planted. The tension in the room was palpable when the door suddenly opened again. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped in, his presence immediately commanding attention. I apologize for the interruption, he said smoothly. I was informed there was an issue involving my nephew. Marilyn's heart stopped. 17 years had passed, but she would have recognized Richard Harlow anywhere. The boyish good looks had matured into distinguished features, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. Success had polished him, but those intense eyes remained unchanged. Eyes exactly like Elijah's. Richard, Dr. Harlow said, clearly surprised. I didn't realize you were in town. Just arrived this morning. Preston called me, quite distressed about his friend being accused of cheating. Richard's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Marilyn without a flicker of recognition before moving to Elijah. I assume this is the student in question? Yes, Principal Donovan said, recovering his composure. Elijah Winters, one of our scholarship students. Richard extended his hand to Elijah. Richard Harlow, I understand you're interested in quantum physics. Elijah shook his hand, his expression guarded. Yes, sir. My nephew speaks highly of your abilities. Says you're the only real competition he has. A flash of surprise crossed Elijah's face. Preston said that? Not in those exact words, Richard admitted with a slight smile. But I've learned to interpret teenage boy speak over the years. He turned to Marilyn, extending his hand. And you must be Elijah's mother. Preston mentioned you work at the school. Marilyn took his hand. fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. Yes, I'm the head librarian, Marilyn Winters. Something flickered briefly in his eyes as he looked at her. A moment of uncertainty, perhaps a ghost of recognition quickly dismissed. After all, she'd been Marilyn Edwards when he knew her, and 17 years had passed since then. Whatever he might have sensed, he gave no further indication, smoothly continuing the conversation as though meeting her for the first time. Well, Mrs. Winters, I'd like to understand exactly what's happening here. From what Preston told me, there seems to be some confusion about an exam. Before anyone could respond, the door opened once more, and Preston Harlow entered, followed by his father, William. Preston's confident swagger faltered slightly when he saw Elijah and Marilyn, but he quickly recovered. "Uncle Richard, I didn't know you were coming." "Clearly," Richard replied dryly. "Now, perhaps someone can explain why we're accusing one of Westridge's top students of cheating?" Dr. Harlow cleared his throat. "The situation is straightforward, Richard. Elijah's exam answers matched my private solution key exactly, including an intentional error I include specifically to catch cheaters." "I see. And how would Elijah have accessed this key?" "That's what we're trying to determine, but the evidence of cheating is irrefutable." Richard turned to Elijah. "What do you have to say about this?" Elijah straightened, meeting the billionaire's gaze directly. "I didn't cheat, sir. I couldn't have accessed Dr. Harlow's office during the times in question, and more importantly, I wouldn't have answered the quantum entanglement question the way it appears on that paper." "Oh," Richard's interest visibly sharpened. "Why not?" "Because I've been developing an alternative approach to quantum field unification that would yield a different solution." Elijah hesitated, then added with quiet confidence, "The standard model has inconsistencies when applied to certain quantum gravity scenarios. My approach addresses those." Richard's eyebrows rose. He turned to his brother. "James, may I see the exam and solution key?" As Dr. Harlow handed over the papers, Marilyn watched Richard's face carefully. For a moment, he was simply the brilliant physicist again, his mind engaged with the theoretical problem. Then his expression changed, becoming more focused as he looked between the exam and Elijah. "This is interesting," he said finally. "The approach outlined here follows the standard model exactly, including James's error in the boundary conditions." He looked at Elijah. "You said you've developed an alternative approach?" Elijah nodded and opened his notebook again. "It's based on a modified field theory that treats quantum entanglement as a fundamental property rather than an emergent one." Richard studied the equations, his expression growing increasingly intrigued. "This is remarkably similar to some work I was doing at MIT before I left academia." He looked up sharply. "Who's been guiding this research?" "Dr. Mei Chan at MIT. She's been mentoring me remotely since the summer program." "Mei?" Richard looked genuinely surprised. "She doesn't take on many students. She said my approach reminded her of some unpublished work a colleague had started years ago but never finished." Elijah shrugged. "She thought it had potential." A strange expression crossed Richard's face, something between shock and dawning realization. He looked at Marilyn, then back at Elijah, his gaze suddenly more intent. "Mrs. Winters," he said carefully, "how old is your son?" The room went silent. Marilyn felt the weight of 16 years of secrets pressing down on her. 16, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. 16, Richard repeated, his eyes never leaving her face. "Born when?" "April 12, 2001. Richard did the mental calculation, his expression changing as the pieces fell into place. "And his father? This is the moment you've been waiting for. If you're feeling the tension right now, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that justice can prevail." Marilyn took a deep breath. For 16 years, she'd protected this secret, created an entire fiction about a husband who'd left when Elijah was 7. She'd done it to shield her son from the pain of knowing his father had never even acknowledged his existence, had chosen career ambition over fatherhood without a second thought. But now, with Elijah's future hanging in the balance, with Richard Harlow standing before her, looking at her son with dawning recognition. The time for secrets was over. His father left Boston in December 2000, after I told him I was pregnant, making it clear his career came first. He was finishing his PhD at MIT and joining a tech startup in California. She met Richard's gaze directly. His name was Richard Harlow. The room erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Preston's mouth fell open in disbelief. Dr. James Harlow staggered back slightly, gripping the edge of the conference table. Principal Donovan looked as though someone had struck him. But Marilyn's focus remained on the two people whose reactions mattered most. Richard stood perfectly still, his face a mask of stunned recognition as he stared at Elijah with new eyes, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the shape of his own jaw, the familiar intensity in those dark eyes, the distinctive way the boy's hands moved as he'd explained his theories. And Elijah, her beautiful, brilliant boy, looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. His face drained of color as he turned to her, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. "Mom!" His voice cracked on the single syllable. "What are you saying?" Marilyn moved to him, taking his trembling hands in hers. "I'm sorry, Elijah. I should have told you the truth long ago." "The truth?" He pulled away, anger flashing through his shock. "You told me my father left us when I was 7, that he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family. That was all a lie." "Not entirely," she said softly. "He did leave. Just before you were born, not after." "And he didn't know about me?" Elijah's gaze darted to Richard, who remained frozen in place. "He never knew I existed?" "I told him I was pregnant," Marilyn said, the memory still painful after all these years. "But he made it clear his career came first, that he couldn't be a father then. So I decided to raise you on my own, without obligations or complications." "Without me?" Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You decided without me." Marilyn turned to face him. "You decided first, Richard. You chose your startup over any possibility of a family. I was just respecting that choice. By raising my son without me for 16 years? Anger edged into his tone. By creating a fiction about a husband who abandoned you both when I made it clear I couldn't be a father then? I was protecting Elijah," she shot back. "What was better for him? Believing his father left when he was old enough to have some memories, or knowing his father never even wanted to know he existed?" "That's not fair," Richard said, echoing words from their last conversation 17 years ago. "You never gave me the chance to." "Enough." Elijah's voice cut through their argument, stronger and more commanding than Marilyn had ever heard it. "This isn't about either of you right now. This is about me being falsely accused of cheating. Can we please focus on that first?" The maturity in his request silenced both parents. Richard was the first to recover, turning to his nephew with newfound scrutiny. "Preston," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "You told me on the phone that Elijah was being unfairly accused, that you wanted my help clearing his name." Preston shifted uncomfortably under his uncle's gaze. I was just concerned about the situation." "Were you?" Richard stepped closer to his nephew. "Because it seems to me that you were trying to manipulate me into intervening in a situation you created." "I don't know what you're talking about," Preston protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Richard picked up the exam paper again. "This handwriting. It's not Elijah's, is it?" He looked between the two boys. "It's yours, Preston. You copied my brother's answer key and submitted it under Elijah's name." "That's ridiculous," William Harlow interjected, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Preston would never." "Let me see that," Judge Blackwell interrupted, taking the exam from Richard. She studied it carefully, then looked at Preston. "Young man, do you have any of your schoolwork with you? A notebook, perhaps?" Preston hesitated, then reluctantly pulled a notebook from his backpack. Judge Blackwell compared the handwriting, her expression growing stern. "The similarities are unmistakable," she declared, "particularly in the formation of certain Greek symbols and mathematical notations." "That doesn't prove anything," William insisted. Many students develop similar handwriting styles when learning specialized notation. Perhaps, Judge Blackwell conceded. But combined with Mr. Reyes's testimony about seeing Preston enter the science building after hours, and the fact that Elijah has been developing a completely different theoretical approach that would have yielded different answers, she looked at Principal Donovan. I believe we have more than reasonable doubt about this accusation. Dr. James Harlow had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now he stepped forward, his academic integrity apparently overcoming family loyalty. There's a simple way to resolve this, he said. I can create a new problem right now, one that tests the quantum entanglement principles in question. If Elijah truly understands the material at the level his notebook suggests, his approach should yield a viable solution, even if it differs from conventional methods. Principal Donovan nodded. That seems reasonable. I agree, Richard said, his gaze still fixed on Elijah with a mixture of wonder and regret. And I'd like to observe if no one objects. 15 minutes later, Elijah sat at the conference table, a blank sheet of paper before him and a complex quantum physics problem written on the whiteboard. The room was silent except for the scratch of his pencil as he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Marilyn watched her son with pride and a touch of fear. This was his element, the world of numbers and theories where his mind soared free. But so much more than an exam result hung in the balance now. Richard stood nearby, his eyes never leaving Elijah as the boy worked. Marilyn could read the emotions warring on his face. Shock, regret, pride, anger, wonder. 17 years of fatherhood compressed into a single morning of revelation. After 20 minutes, Elijah set down his pencil. I'm finished. Dr. Harlow took the paper, studying it with growing astonishment. This is remarkable. The approach is completely unorthodox, but the mathematics is sound. He looked up at his brother. Richard, you should see this. It's extraordinarily similar to your early work on quantum field unification. Richard took the paper, his hands not quite steady. As he read through Elijah's solution, his expression transformed. This addresses the very inconsistencies I was struggling with before I left academia. He looked at Elijah with undisguised admiration. You derived this independently? Elijah nodded, still wary but unable to hide his intellectual excitement. The standard model breaks down at certain boundary conditions. I found that by treating entanglement as fundamental rather than emergent, those inconsistencies resolve themselves. Exactly, Richard breathed. That's exactly the approach I was exploring before. He trailed off, the weight of his choices visibly settling on him. Before I chose a different path. Dr. Harlow cleared his throat. Well, I think this conclusively demonstrates that Elijah not only understands the material but has developed insights beyond what I'm teaching. He would have no need to cheat, and indeed, if he had written this exam himself, his answers would have differed significantly from my key. He turned to Preston, his expression hardening, which raises serious questions about who actually submitted this fraudulent exam. Preston's confident facade finally crumbled. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he blurted out. I just wanted to teach him a lesson. He's always showing everyone up, making the rest of us look stupid. Preston, his father warned, but it was too late. You don't understand what it's like, Preston continued, his voice rising. Everyone expects me to be brilliant because I'm a Harlow, but he's the one who gets all the recognition, all the awards, the MIT summer program, and he's just a scholarship kid. The naked prejudice in those last words hung in the air. Judge Blackwell's expression hardened. Young man, she said coldly, you have just admitted to academic fraud motivated by jealousy and class prejudice. In my courtroom, that would have serious consequences. Principal Donovan looked deeply troubled. The Westridge Honor Code is very clear about academic integrity violations. I'm afraid this will require formal disciplinary action. William Harlow stepped forward. Surely we can handle this privately. Boys make mistakes. Preston has learned his lesson. Has he? Richard's voice cut through his brother-in-law's platitudes. Because what I'm hearing is not remorse but resentment that his plan failed. He turned to Principal Donovan. Westridge Academy was founded on principles of academic excellence and integrity. If those principles only apply to some students and not others, then perhaps the Harlow family's continued support should be reconsidered. The implied threat of withdrawing financial backing sent a visible shock through the room. William paled. "Richard, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," Richard replied evenly. "My nephew attempted to destroy another student's academic future out of petty jealousy. That student, as it happens, is my son. A fact I'm only learning today because his mother believed, with good reason, that I would value my career over my child." His voice caught slightly. "She wasn't wrong then, but I'd like to think I've changed in 17 years. He turned to Principal Donovan. "I expect Westridge to handle this situation with complete fairness and transparency. No special treatment for the Harlow name, in either direction." Principal Donovan straightened, seeming to find his backbone. "Of course, the disciplinary committee will review all evidence and determine appropriate consequences for Preston. Meanwhile, all accusations against Elijah are withdrawn, with apologies from the administration." "Thank you," Marilyn said quietly. She looked at her son, who had remained remarkably composed throughout this extraordinary meeting. "Elijah, do you want to go home? You've been through a lot today." Elijah hesitated, looking between her and Richard. "Actually, I think I'd like to go to class. I have AP chemistry in 20 minutes, and we're starting a new unit." A ripple of surprised laughter broke the tension. Even in the midst of personal upheaval, Elijah's dedication to his education remained steadfast. "Of course," Marilyn smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "But maybe we can all talk later? There's clearly a lot to discuss." Richard nodded, his eyes never leaving Elijah's face. "I'd like that very much. If you're willing, Elijah." For a long moment, Elijah studied the man who was his biological father, the brilliant physicist whose work had unknowingly influenced his own, the tech billionaire whose name and wealth had shaped Westridge Academy, the absent parent whose choices had defined his life in ways neither of them had understood until today. "I have questions," Elijah said finally. "A lot of them." "I'm sure you do," Richard replied softly. "I'll answer everything I can." "Okay then." Elijah gathered his notebook and backpack. "After school? The coffee shop on Maple Street has good hot chocolate." "I'll be there," Richard promised. As Elijah left for class, the adults began dispersing. Preston and his father were escorted to another office to begin the disciplinary process. Dr. Harlow and the board members filed out, still processing the morning's revelations. Soon only Marilyn, Richard, and Judge Blackwell remained in the conference room. "Well," Judge Blackwell said, gathering her things, "I believe I've witnessed enough drama for one morning. Marilyn, call me if you need anything." She paused at the door, fixing Richard with a stern look. "Mr. Harlow, I knew Marilyn's mother for 40 years. She was one of the finest women I've ever known. Her daughter and grandson deserve nothing but your respect and support, regardless of what happens next." After she left, silence stretched between Marilyn and Richard. 17 years of unspoken words, choices, and consequences hanging in the air between them. "Why didn't you keep in touch? Let me know how he was growing up," Richard finally asked, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. Marilyn sighed, suddenly exhausted. "You made it very clear that fatherhood wasn't compatible with your ambitions, Richard. That last day in your apartment, when I told you I was pregnant, you said you couldn't be a father then. Your career came first." "I was young and stupid and focused on the wrong things," he admitted. "But after he was born, I had a right to know about my son's life. And Elijah had a right to a father who wanted him," she countered. "Not one who saw him as an inconvenient complication." Richard flinched at the accuracy of her words. "I would have provided for him. He needed more than financial support. He needed presence, guidance, love." Marilyn gathered her purse, needing space to process everything that had happened. "Look at what you've missed, Richard. 16 years of watching that brilliant mind develop. of seeing him learn to walk, to read, to question everything around him, of hearing him explain his first science project with more enthusiasm than most adults bring to their life's work. Pain flashed across Richard's face. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't already regret every moment I've lost? I don't know what you think, Marilyn said honestly. I haven't known you for 17 years. The Richard the first knew was brilliant and charming and utterly focused on his own ambitions. The man you've become, she shrugged. That's for Elijah to discover now. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I did tell him good things about you. His father who left. I said he was brilliant and passionate about science. That Elijah got his curiosity and intelligence from him. I never wanted him to think he came from something broken or unworthy. Richard's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. Thank you for that, at least. He hesitated. Marilyn, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'd like a chance to know my son, to be part of his life if he'll allow it. That's Elijah's decision now, she said gently. He's 16, old enough to choose what relationship he wants with you. I won't stand in the way of whatever he decides. As she walked out of Westridge Academy, Marilyn felt as though a weight she'd carried for 16 years was finally lifting. The secret that had shaped their lives was out, for better or worse. What came next would depend on choices, Richard's, Elijah's, and her own. But for the first time in years, those choices would be made in the light of truth, not in the shadow of secrets. The coffee shop on Maple Street was busy that afternoon, filled with students unwinding after school and adults catching up over lattes. Marilyn sat at a corner table, watching the door as she waited for Elijah and Richard to arrive. She'd spent the day in a daze, going through the motions of her work in the library, while her mind replayed the morning's events on an endless loop. Several teachers had stopped by, curious about the rumors already spreading through the school, that Preston Harlow had been suspended, that Richard Harlow himself had intervened, that somehow Elijah Winters was connected to the Harlow family. Marilyn had deflected their questions as best she could. This story belonged to Elijah first. How and when to share it should be his choice. The bell above the door jingled, and Elijah entered, scanning the room until he spotted her. He made his way through the crowded tables, his expression guarded. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Hey yourself," she replied softly. "How was the rest of your day?" He shrugged. "Weird. Everyone's talking about Preston getting suspended. Some people are being extra nice to me, which is almost worse than when they ignored me." He fidgeted with a sugar packet. "Is he coming?" "He said he would be." Marilyn studied her son's face. "How are you feeling about all this?" Elijah was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Angry, I guess. Confused. But also..." He hesitated. "Curious. All these years, I thought my father was just some guy who couldn't handle responsibility. But he's Richard Harlow. The Richard Harlow. His quantum computing breakthroughs revolutionized the entire field. His company's technology is in everything from medical devices to space exploration systems. He's still just a man, Elijah," Marilyn said gently. "A brilliant one, yes, but still human, with human flaws and mistakes. Like abandoning his pregnant girlfriend?" The bitterness in his voice cut through her. "He didn't know I was pregnant when he left," she corrected. "I found out after, and when I told him, he made it clear his career came first. So I made a choice to raise you on my own, without complications. Without me knowing who I really am." Elijah's eyes flashed with hurt. "Do you know how many times I've read about his work? How many of his papers I've studied? Dr. Chun even suggested I read his early theoretical work on quantum field unification because it related to my research. My own father's work, and I never knew." Before Marilyn could respond, the door opened again, and Richard entered. He'd changed from his business suit into more casual attire. Dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look more like the young physicist she'd known in Boston than the tech billionaire who graced magazine covers. He spotted them immediately, hesitating briefly before approaching their table. The confidence that had always seemed so natural to him was tempered now with uncertainty. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Elijah nodded, his expression carefully neutral. We ordered hot chocolate. I wasn't sure what you'd want. Hot chocolate sounds perfect, Richard said, signaling to a nearby server. When she arrived, he ordered with a warmth that surprised Marilyn. 3 hot chocolates, please, with extra whipped cream if possible. After the server left, an awkward silence fell over the table. 17 years of absence couldn't be bridged with small talk about the weather or school. I don't know where to start, Richard finally admitted, his gaze moving between Marilyn and Elijah. There's so much I want to ask, so much I want to tell you both. Why don't you start with why you're in Oak Ridge? Marilyn suggested. Preston said he called you about Elijah's situation, but you were already on your way here. Richard nodded. I come back quarterly for board meetings at Westridge, as part of the arrangement with my foundation's endowment. Usually, I fly in for the meeting and leave immediately after, but this time, he hesitated. This time, Mei Chen suggested I might want to stay longer. Dr. Chun. Elijah leaned forward, surprised. What does she have to do with this? She contacted me last week, Richard explained. She said she was mentoring a remarkably gifted student at Westridge whose approach to quantum field theory reminded her of my early work. She thought I might be interested in meeting you. A rueful smile crossed his face. She didn't mention your name. Just said you were 16 and already developing theories that most doctoral candidates couldn't grasp. She never told me she knew you personally, Elijah said, clearly processing this new information. We were colleagues at MIT before I left academia. She's one of the few people from that world I've stayed in touch with. Richard's expression grew thoughtful. Looking back, I think she suspected something. The similarities in your approach to quantum entanglement are too specific to be coincidental. Theoretical frameworks often reflect the way a physicist's mind works, like a fingerprint. The server returned with their hot chocolates, providing a momentary reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. Marilyn wrapped her hands around the warm mug, gathering her thoughts. So you came to Oak Ridge to meet Elijah, not knowing he was your son, she clarified. And then Preston called about the cheating accusation. Richard nodded. The timing was coincidental. Preston called last night, frantic about his friend being unfairly accused. He painted himself as the concerned classmate trying to help. His expression hardened. I should have recognized the manipulation. Preston has always been skilled at presenting himself as the hero of every story. Like uncle, like nephew, Marilyn murmured, then immediately regretted the barb when hurt flashed across Richard's face. I deserved that, he acknowledged quietly. I wasn't a good person when you knew me, Marilyn. I was ambitious and selfish and convinced that my work was more important than anything, or anyone else. And now? She challenged. Richard considered the question seriously. Now I understand that success without connection is hollow. That all the breakthroughs and billions don't mean much when you come home to an empty house. He looked at Elijah. But that's not why I'm here. I'm not looking for sympathy or forgiveness. I just want a chance to know my son. If he's willing to give me that chance. Elijah had been unusually quiet, studying Richard with the same analytical focus he brought to complex equations. Now he spoke, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. I have questions. A lot of them. I expect you do, Richard said. I'll answer everything I can. Did you ever think about her? After you left? Elijah's first question caught both adults by surprise. Did you ever wonder what happened to Mom? Richard's gaze shifted to Marilyn, regret evident in his eyes. Yes, more than I had any right to. He took a deep breath. I tried to contact her about 6 months after I left Boston. Called the library at Wellesley, but they said she'd moved. I didn't pursue it further, told myself it was better that way. That she deserved someone who could put her first. You could have tried harder, Elijah said bluntly. Yes, Richard agreed. I could have, should have. It's one of many regrets I carry. What about other children? Elijah asked. Do I have half-siblings somewhere? Richard shook his head. No, I never married, never had other children. My work became my life. A sad smile touched his lips. My brother James always said I was married to my company. He wasn't wrong. Elijah absorbed this, then asked the question Marilyn had been dreading. Why did you lie to me, Mom? All these years, making up stories about a husband who left when I was 7? Why not just tell me the truth? Marilyn felt the weight of every well-intentioned deception pressing down on her. I thought I was protecting you, she said softly. When you were little and started asking about your father, it seemed kinder to say he'd been part of your life but left, rather than a man who knew but chose his career over fatherhood. And as you got older, the story was established. Changing it meant admitting I'd lied to you for years. But why say he left when I was 7? Why not just that he left before I was born? Because by 7, you were old enough to have some memories, but young enough that they'd be vague. It made the story more believable. Marilyn reached for his hand. I'm so sorry, Elijah. I convinced myself I was doing what was best for you, but I was also protecting myself from having to face the past. Elijah pulled his hand away, hurt evident in his eyes. I used to make up memories of him. Did you know that? Little things like him teaching me to ride a bike or reading me bedtime stories. I'd pretend I could almost remember his voice. His voice cracked slightly, but it was all fake. He wasn't even there. The pain in his words hung in the air between them. Richard looked stricken, the full impact of his absence finally hitting home. I can't change the past, Elijah, he said quietly. I can't give you back those years or those memories. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future. Why? Elijah challenged. Because I'm smart? Because my research interests you? Or just because you found out I exist and feel obligated? Because you're my son, Richard said simply. Yes, your brilliance amazes me. The work you're doing with quantum field theory is extraordinary. But even if you'd never picked up a physics textbook in your life, I'd still want to know you. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. You're part of me, Elijah. A part one didn't know was missing until today. The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach Elijah, who nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. This morning I was just trying to avoid being expelled. Now I've got a billionaire father who wants to be in my life, and everyone at school is going to be looking at me differently, and... He trailed off, overwhelmed. We take it one day at a time, Marilyn suggested gently. There's no rule book for this situation. We all just do our best to be honest with each other going forward. Richard nodded in agreement. No pressure, no expectations. Just getting to know each other, if that's something you want. Elijah was quiet for a moment, stirring his hot chocolate thoughtfully. I'd like to see your lab, he said finally. Dr. Chan says your quantum computing facility is the most advanced in the world. A smile broke across Richard's face, the first genuine one Marilyn had seen since he'd walked into that boardroom this morning. It is, and I'd be honored to show it to you. We're working on some applications of quantum entanglement theory that might interest you, actually. As father and son began discussing quantum physics, their shared passion creating a bridge across 16 years of absence, Marilyn felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally out. Regret for the years of secrecy. Anxiety about what this would mean for their future. And underneath it all, a cautious hope that perhaps something good could come from this long-delayed reunion. The conversation flowed more easily as the afternoon progressed. Richard asked about Elijah's childhood, listening intently as Marilyn shared stories of science fair projects and chess tournaments, first steps and favorite books. Elijah gradually opened up, asking questions about Richard's work and sharing more details about his own research. By the time they left the coffee shop, the awkwardness had eased somewhat, replaced by a tentative connection that held both promise and uncertainty. I'm staying at the Oak Ridge Grand through the weekend, Richard said as they stood on the sidewalk outside. Perhaps we could have dinner tomorrow night? All three of us. Marilyn looked to Elijah, letting him make the decision. Okay, he agreed. But I have chess club until 5:30. I'll pick you both up at 6 o'clock, Richard promised. He hesitated, clearly unsure of the appropriate goodbye. Finally, he extended his hand to Elijah. "Thank you for giving me this chance. It means more than I can express." Elijah shook his hand, his expression still guarded but no longer hostile. "See you tomorrow." As Richard walked away, Marilyn and Elijah headed toward their car in companionable silence. It wasn't until they were halfway home that Elijah spoke again. "He's not what I expected," he admitted. "From his interviews and articles, he always seemed so perfect, confident, like nothing could touch him." "No one is that perfect up close," Marilyn said. "Not even Richard Harlow. Are you okay with this? With him being in our lives now?" Marilyn considered the question carefully. "I think so. It won't be easy, there's a lot of history and hurt to work through. But you deserve to know your father, and he seems genuinely interested in knowing you." "Not just because of my research?" "I don't think so," she said honestly. "The way he looked at you, Elijah, that wasn't scientific interest. That was a father seeing his son for the first time." Elijah nodded, processing this. "One more question. The most important one." "What's that?" "Can we order pizza tonight? I'm emotionally exhausted and starving." Marilyn laughed, grateful for her son's resilience and humor even in the midst of such upheaval. "Absolutely. Extra cheese and pepperoni coming right up." The next morning, Westridge Academy was buzzing with rumors. By the time Marilyn arrived at the library, 3 different versions of yesterday's events were circulating among students and faculty alike. The most accurate involved Preston's suspension for academic fraud. The most outlandish suggested that Elijah was secretly a Harlow heir who had been testing the school's integrity by posing as a scholarship student. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. Principal Donovan called Marilyn to his office mid-morning. He looked haggard, as though he'd aged years in a single day. "Marilyn," he began awkwardly, "I want to formally apologize for how the accusation against Elijah was handled. We should have investigated more thoroughly before jumping to conclusions." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, not making it easy for him. He sighed. "The disciplinary committee met last night. Preston has been suspended for the remainder of the semester, with strict academic probation upon his return. His college recommendations will reflect this incident." "And his father accepted this?" William wasn't happy, but Richard made it clear that any attempt to mitigate the consequences would result in a reevaluation of the Harlow Foundation's support for Westridge. Principal Donovan looked uncomfortable. "Which brings me to a delicate matter. The board is naturally curious about Elijah's connection to Richard Harlow." "I imagine they are," Marilyn said dryly. "But that's a private family matter, not school business." Of course," he backpedaled quickly. "I just wanted to assure you that Elijah's position at Westridge is secure, regardless of what happens with his scholarship." The implication was clear. Now that Elijah was known to be Richard Harlow's son, the school would find a way to keep him enrolled, scholarship or not. "Elijah earned his place here," Marilyn said firmly. "His academic achievements stand on their own merits, not his parentage. I expect Westridge to remember that." Principal Donovan nodded, properly chastened. "Absolutely. His record speaks for itself." As Marilyn left his office, she reflected on how quickly perceptions could change. Yesterday, Elijah had been the scholarship student facing expulsion. Today, he was Richard Harlow's son, treated with newfound deference by the same administration that had been ready to cast him out. The irony wasn't lost on her. Back in the library, she found Elijah waiting by her desk, his expression troubled. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Not really," he admitted. "Everyone's treating me differently. Preston's friends are glaring at me like I got him in trouble on purpose. Other kids who never talked to me before are suddenly acting like we're best friends." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "And Dr. Harlow, Uncle James, I guess, asked me to stay after class to discuss my remarkable theoretical work that he was dismissing as cheating yesterday." Marilyn's heart ached for her son. People are adjusting to new information. It's uncomfortable now, but it will settle down eventually. Will it? Or will I always be Richard Harlowe's secret son now instead of just Elijah? You've never been just Elijah, she said softly. You're the boy who taught himself calculus at 12, who builds telescopes from scratch, who helps Mr. Reyes practice his English and tutors freshmen in physics without being asked. That's who you are, regardless of who your father is. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Thanks, Mom. He hesitated. There's something else. Dr. Chun called this morning. She wants me to apply for early admission to MIT's special physics program next fall. That's wonderful, Marilyn exclaimed, then noticed his conflicted expression. Isn't it? She said Richard called her last night. That he's excited about my research and wants to support my education. Elijah looked troubled. What if she's only interested in me now because of him? Elijah, Dr. Chun has been mentoring you for months, long before she knew about your connection to Richard. She recognized your talent on its own merits. Maybe, he conceded. But now I'll never know for sure, will I? Any opportunity one get, any recognition. I'll always wonder if it's because of my work or because I'm Richard Harlowe's son. The weight of this new reality settled between them. Marilyn had spent 16 years protecting Elijah from the shadow of his father's absence. Now she would need to help him navigate the equally complicated shadow of his father's presence. Your work speaks for itself, she said firmly. Anyone who takes the time to understand what you're doing will see that. And as for the rest, the people who judge you based on your last name rather than your character, they don't deserve your concern. Elijah nodded, not entirely convinced but somewhat reassured. I should get to class. See you at home later. I'll be there by 5:30. Don't forget we're having dinner with Richard tonight. As she watched him walk away, Marilyn was struck by how much had changed in just 24 hours. Their quiet, carefully constructed life had been upended, exposing long-buried secrets and opening doors to possibilities neither of them had imagined. What would you have done in Marilyn's position? Would you have kept the secret or revealed it sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of triumph against the odds. The Oak Ridge Grand Hotel's restaurant was elegant without being ostentatious, with soft lighting and well-spaced tables that offered privacy for conversation. Richard was waiting when Marilyn and Elijah arrived, rising to greet them with a warmth that seemed genuine if still slightly awkward. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to the table he'd reserved in a quiet corner. I took the liberty of ordering appetizers, but please choose whatever you'd like for dinner. As they settled in, Marilyn noticed how Richard's gaze kept returning to Elijah, as though he couldn't quite believe the reality of his son sitting across from him. There was wonder in that gaze, and regret, and something else, a hunger to make up for lost time. How was school today? Richard asked, attempting normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. Elijah shrugged, unfolding his napkin. Different. Everyone's talking about Preston's suspension, and about you being in town. He hesitated. A few people have figured out the connection. I'm sorry, Richard said, genuine concern crossing his face. I know this can't be easy for you. It's not your fault, Elijah replied, surprising both adults with his generosity. Well, not this part anyway. A small smile tugged at Richard's lips. Fair enough. The waiter arrived to take their orders, providing a welcome interruption. Once he'd gone, Richard leaned forward slightly. I spoke with Mei Chun this morning, he said. She mentioned suggesting the early admission program to you. Elijah nodded, his expression guarded. She did. It's an extraordinary opportunity. Only 5 students are accepted each year. I know. Elijah met his father's gaze directly. Did you tell her to offer it to me? Richard shook his head. No. She's been considering recommending you since last summer. She only called me because she wanted to be transparent about our connection now that it's known. He hesitated. I did tell her I'd be honored if you chose to attend MIT, but that all decisions should be based solely on your academic merits. Some of the tension left Elijah's shoulders. Good. Because I want to earn my place, not have it handed to me because of who my father is. You've more than earned it, Richard assured him. Your work on quantum field unification is genuinely groundbreaking. Most physicists don't develop that level of theoretical insight until well into their doctoral studies, if ever. Elijah couldn't quite hide his pleasure at this professional validation. Dr. Chun says the same thing. She thinks my approach could help resolve some of the inconsistencies in current quantum gravity models. As father and son began discussing physics again, their shared passion creating a bridge across years of absence, Marilyn observed the interaction with mixed emotions. The intellectual connection between them was undeniable. They spoke the same language, their minds working along similar pathways. Yet there remained a careful distance, a wariness on Elijah's part that reflected 16 years of absence. Richard seemed to sense this too. After their meals arrived, he deliberately shifted the conversation to more personal ground. "Tell me about growing up in Oak Ridge," he said. "What was it like?" Elijah glanced at Marilyn, then back at Richard. "It was good, mostly. We didn't have a lot of money, but Mom made sure I had books and a computer and everything I needed for school." A hint of pride entered his voice. "She worked 2 jobs sometimes so I could do summer science programs and chess tournaments." Richard's gaze shifted to Marilyn, respect and regret mingling in his expression. "You did an amazing job raising him." "He made it easy," she replied simply. "He was reading by 3, doing algebra by 8. The challenge was keeping up with his mind, not motivating him." "I was a weird kid," Elijah admitted with a small smile, "always taking things apart to see how they worked. Mom came home once to find I'd disassembled our microwave to understand the magnetron." "Were you able to put it back together?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. "Mostly. It worked again, but the clock was always 14 minutes fast after that." They all laughed, the tension easing slightly as they shared more stories. Elijah's first science fair, his brief but disastrous attempt at baseball. Physics didn't help me catch any better. The time he'd corrected his 3rd-grade teacher's explanation of gravity and been sent to the principal's office for disrupting class. As dessert arrived, Richard grew more serious. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said carefully. "I know this is all very new, and I don't want to rush anything, but I'd like to be part of your life, Elijah, in whatever way you're comfortable with." Elijah set down his fork, considering this. "What exactly are you proposing?" "To start, perhaps I could visit Oak Ridge more regularly. Get to know you better. Support your education and interests." Richard hesitated. "And eventually, if you're willing, I'd like to legally acknowledge you as my son." The implications of this hung in the air between them. Legal recognition would mean more than just a relationship. It would mean access to the Harlow name, resources, and legacy. "I don't need your money," Elijah said, a hint of his mother's pride evident in his tone. "I know you don't," Richard replied, "but I'd like to make up for 16 years of absence in whatever ways I can, including ensuring you have every educational opportunity available." Marilyn intervened gently. "Perhaps we should take this one step at a time. Legal considerations can wait until you've had a chance to build a relationship." Richard nodded, accepting the wisdom of her caution. "Of course. No pressure, no rush." He turned back to Elijah. "In the meantime, I'd like to show you my research facility in Boston. Perhaps over winter break? You could meet my team, see the quantum computing lab. Bring your mother, of course," he added, glancing at Marilyn. Elijah's eyes lit up despite his attempt to remain detached. "That would be interesting. And I'd like to see more of your work on quantum field unification," Richard continued. "If you're willing to share it, perhaps we could discuss it together sometimes." "I'd like that," Elijah admitted, his scientific curiosity overcoming his emotional reservations. As they finished dessert and prepared to leave, Richard hesitated, then pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something for you. It's not much, but—" He handed it to Elijah. "It belonged to my father, your grandfather." Elijah opened the box to reveal an antique pocket watch, its silver case engraved with intricate mathematical symbols. "He was a mathematician at Princeton," Richard explained. "He gave me that watch when I published my first paper. Said it was a tradition in our family, passed down to those who advanced human knowledge. A shadow crossed his face. He died before I left academia for the business world. Sometimes I wonder if he would have approved of my choice. Elijah studied the watch, running his finger over the engravings. These are Euler's identity and the Schrödinger equation. Richard nodded, pleased by his recognition. My father added a new equation for each generation. The Schrödinger equation was his addition. I added Heisenberg's uncertainty principle when I inherited it. He hesitated. Perhaps someday you'll add your own contribution. The gesture clearly touched Elijah, who carefully closed the box and slipped it into his pocket. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. Outside the restaurant, the night air was crisp with approaching winter. Richard walked them to their car, the conversation flowing more easily now than it had at the beginning of the evening. I'll be in Oak Ridge until Sunday, he said as they prepared to leave. Perhaps we could meet again before I go back to Boston? I'd like to hear more about your college plans. Elijah nodded. Maybe Saturday? There's a physics lecture at the community college I was planning to attend. About recent developments in quantum computing, actually. I'd love to join you, Richard said, genuine enthusiasm in his voice. He turned to Marilyn. If that's all right with you? Of course, she agreed. Elijah's decisions about his relationship with you are his to make. As they drove home, Marilyn glanced at her son, trying to gauge his emotional state after this significant evening. You okay? Elijah was quiet for a moment, staring out at the passing streetlights. It's weird, he finally said. All my life, I've had this idea of my father as this shadowy figure who abandoned us. Now he's Richard Harlow, and he's interested in my research, and he's giving me family heirlooms. He shook his head. I don't know how to feel about any of it. That's understandable, Marilyn said gently. There's no rule book for this situation. You're allowed to have complicated feelings. What about you? Elijah asked, turning to study her profile in the dim light. How do you feel about seeing him again after all these years? Marilyn considered the question carefully. Conflicted. Part of me is still angry about the past. But another part recognizes that he's not the same person he was 17 years ago. None of us are. She sighed. Mostly, I want whatever is best for you. If having a relationship with your father brings good things into your life, then I support that completely. Even though he hurt you? That was a long time ago, she said softly. And holding on to old pain only hurts ourselves in the end. Elijah was quiet again, processing this wisdom. Then he pulled the pocket watch from his pocket, studying it in the glow of passing streetlights. Do you think Grandma would have liked knowing I'm a Harlow? The question caught Marilyn by surprise. Her mother had passed away 3 years ago, never knowing the truth about Elijah's paternity. I think she would have been proud of you no matter what your last name was, she said honestly. She always said you had a special mind, that you were going to change the world someday. I miss her, Elijah admitted. She would have known exactly what to say about all this. Yes, she would have, Marilyn agreed, remembering her mother's unfailing wisdom and practical approach to life's challenges. She probably would have told you to judge Richard by his actions going forward, not by his mistakes in the past. Sounds like her, Elijah smiled. Then, more seriously, do you think he really wants to be part of my life? Or is this just guilt and obligation? I think it's more than that, Marilyn said thoughtfully. The way he looks at you, Elijah, that's not obligation. That's a father seeing his son and marveling at who you are. She hesitated. Richard made a terrible mistake 17 years ago, choosing ambition over connection. But people can change. They can learn what truly matters. Elijah nodded, slipping the watch back into his pocket. I guess we'll see. The next few days brought a gradual adjustment to their new reality. At school, the initial shock of Preston's suspension and the rumors about Elijah's connection to Richard Harlow began to fade into the background of everyday academic life. Teachers who had previously seen Elijah as merely a bright scholarship student now paid closer attention to his insights, particularly in science classes. It's annoying, Elijah complained to his mother after Dr. James Harlow had spent an entire class period discussing his quantum field theories. Last week he barely acknowledged my questions. Now he's treating everything I say like it's brilliant. People are complicated, Marilyn replied. They bring their own biases and assumptions to every interaction. The challenge is to remain true to yourself regardless of how others see you. On Saturday, Richard joined them for the physics lecture at the community college, sitting between Marilyn and Elijah in the crowded auditorium. The speaker was a former colleague of Richard's from MIT, who did a double-take upon seeing the famous tech billionaire in the audience of what was supposed to be a modest community event. Richard Harlow, the speaker said during the Q&A session, I didn't expect to see you here. Perhaps you'd like to share some insights on your company's recent quantum computing breakthroughs. Richard shook his head. I'm just here as a guest of my son, he said, placing a hand briefly on Elijah's shoulder. This is his community, not mine. The simple acknowledgement, my son, sent a ripple of whispers through the audience. Elijah tensed slightly under the attention, but there was also a flicker of something like pride in his expression. Afterward, as they walked to a nearby cafe for lunch, Richard seemed more relaxed than he had at their previous meetings. That was an excellent lecture, he commented. Dr. Patel always had a gift for making complex concepts accessible. I liked his explanation of quantum decoherence, Elijah agreed, though I think his model oversimplifies the boundary conditions in certain applications. Richard's eyes lit up with intellectual engagement. I had the same thought. In fact, at Quantum Horizons, we've been developing a modified approach that addresses exactly that limitation. As father and son launched into a technical discussion that quickly exceeded Marilyn's understanding, she observed them with a mixture of emotions. There was something bittersweet about watching them connect through their shared passion for physics. A glimpse of what might have been if Richard had made different choices 16 years ago. Yet there was also something hopeful in their interaction. The past couldn't be changed, but perhaps the future still held possibilities for healing and connection. At the cafe, over sandwiches and coffee, Richard brought up the subject they'd been circling around all weekend. I'm returning to Boston tomorrow, he said, but I'd like to stay in touch. Perhaps regular video calls to discuss your research? And I meant what I said about visiting my lab during winter break. Elijah nodded, more open to the idea than he might have been a few days ago. I'd like that. Dr. Chun says your quantum computing facility is doing groundbreaking work on entanglement preservation. It is, Richard confirmed, and I think your theoretical approach might have applications we haven't even considered yet. He hesitated, then added more personally, I'd also like to get to know you better, not just as a brilliant young physicist, but as my son. Elijah was quiet for a moment, stirring his hot chocolate. I'm still figuring out how I feel about all this, he admitted. It's a lot to process. I understand, Richard said gently. There's no rush, no pressure. We can take this at whatever pace feels right for you. He turned to Marilyn, including her in the conversation. I've been thinking about practical matters as well. I'd like to establish a trust for Elijah's education, college and beyond, and perhaps discuss changing his legal surname to Harlow, if that's something you both might consider. Marilyn felt Elijah tense beside her. As I said before, I think those discussions can wait until you've had time to build a relationship, she said carefully. Elijah has been a Winters his entire life. Changing that is a significant decision. Richard nodded, accepting her caution. Of course, I don't mean to rush anything. I just want you both to know that I'm committed to being part of Elijah's life in whatever way he's comfortable with. Why now? Elijah asked suddenly, the question that had been simmering beneath the surface finally emerging. If you had never found out I was your son, you would have gone your whole life without knowing or caring. What makes these 16 years different from the next 16? The directness of the question seemed to catch Richard off guard. He set down his coffee cup, considering his response carefully. That's a fair question, he acknowledged. The truth is, I've changed over the years. When I left Boston, left your mother, I was consumed by ambition. I believed that my work, my company, was going to change the world in ways that nothing else, including personal relationships, could match in importance. He looked out the cafe window, his expression distant. And in some ways I was right. Quantum Horizons has developed technologies that have transformed medicine, communications, environmental science. But what I didn't understand then was the cost of that single-minded focus. His gaze returned to Elijah. About 5 years ago, I had a health scare. A minor heart attack that turned out to be a warning sign. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by the best medical technology money could buy, technology my company had helped develop, I realized that for all my success, there was no one who truly cared whether I lived or died. No one who knew the man behind the achievements. The vulnerability in this admission hung in the air between them. I started reevaluating my choices after that, Richard continued. Reconnecting with old friends, trying to build something more meaningful than just professional success. When Mei Chun told me about a brilliant young student whose approach to quantum field theory reminded her of my early work, I was intrigued on a purely intellectual level. A smile touched his lips. I never imagined I was about to meet my son. Elijah absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. So if you had known about me back then? When Mom told you she was pregnant, Richard sighed, regret evident in his face. I wish I could say I would have made different choices, that I would have been the father you deserved from the beginning. But the truth is, I don't know. The person I was then might not have been capable of putting someone else's needs before his ambitions. He met Elijah's gaze directly. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that the person I am now wants to be part of your life. Not out of obligation or guilt, but because meeting you has been the most extraordinary gift I never knew to hope for. The sincerity in Richard's words seemed to reach Elijah, who nodded slowly, some of the wariness in his expression softening. I can't promise anything, he said finally, but I'm willing to try, to see where this goes. That's all I can ask for, Richard replied, relief and gratitude evident in his voice. As they finished their lunch and prepared to leave, Richard hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. One more thing, he said, handing it to Elijah. This is a letter of recommendation from Dr. Chun for the MIT program. She asked me to give it to you. He smiled slightly. She wanted me to tell you that she wrote it 3 months ago, long before she knew about our connection. Your work earned this on its own merits. Elijah took the envelope, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. Thank you. Outside the cafe, as they prepared to part ways, Richard extended his hand to Elijah. I'll call you next weekend? Perhaps we could discuss that paper you mentioned on quantum coherence applications. I'd like that, Elijah agreed, shaking his hand. Then, in a gesture that surprised both adults, he stepped forward and briefly, awkwardly hugged his father. Safe travels back to Boston. The emotion that flashed across Richard's face in that moment was raw and unguarded. A man receiving something he had never expected to have. Thank you, he said softly, his voice not quite steady, for giving me a chance. As they watched Richard walk away toward his waiting car, Marilyn placed a gentle hand on Elijah's shoulder. You okay? He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, I think I am. He glanced at her. Are you? This can't be easy for you either. I'm fine, she assured him. All I've ever wanted is for you to have every opportunity to become the person you're meant to be. If having Richard in your life helps with that, then I'm grateful. They walked to their own car in companionable silence, each processing the events of the past few days in their own way. As Marilyn started the engine, Elijah spoke again. Mom? Thank you. For what? For everything. For working 2 jobs so I could go to science camps. For never making me feel like I was a burden. For believing in me when no one else did. He looked at her with eyes that held wisdom beyond his 16 years. I don't need the Harlow name or money to know who I am. You made sure of that. Tears pricked at Marilyn's eyes as she reached over to squeeze his hand. You are and have always been the best thing in my life, Elijah Winters. Nothing will ever change that. 1 year later, the MIT campus was alive with the energy of a new academic year. students hurrying between buildings under the golden September sunshine. In a quiet corner of the physics department, Elijah Winters Harlow stood before a whiteboard covered in complex equations, explaining his approach to quantum field unification to a small but distinguished audience. At 17, he was the youngest student ever admitted to MIT's special physics program, his dual surname reflecting the careful balance he'd struck between honoring the mother who had raised him and acknowledging the father who had come late but sincerely into his life. In the front row, Marilyn watched with undisguised pride as her son fielded questions from some of the world's leading physicists. Beside her sat Richard, who had flown in from California specifically for this presentation. Over the past year, father and son had built a relationship based on shared intellectual passion and growing personal connection. Weekly video calls had evolved into regular visits, collaborative research, and finally, a modified legal acknowledgement that added Harlow to Elijah's surname while preserving the Winters name that had been his identity for 16 years. "He's remarkable," Richard whispered to Marilyn as Elijah elegantly resolved a particularly challenging question about boundary conditions in his model. "His mind works in ways even I can barely follow sometimes." "He always has," she replied with a small smile. "Even at 4, asking questions about the stars that I couldn't answer." As the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, Dr. May Chan stepped forward to congratulate her protege. "I believe we're witnessing the beginning of a revolutionary approach to quantum physics," she announced to the assembled scientists. "One that may finally bridge the gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity." Elijah accepted the praise with a modesty that made Marilyn's heart swell. Success and recognition hadn't changed his fundamental character. The thoughtful, kind-hearted boy who still called her every day, who still helped others without being asked, who still approached the world with wonder and integrity. After the formal reception, the three of them walked across campus together, heading toward the restaurant where they planned to celebrate. "Preston called yesterday," Elijah mentioned casually. "He's starting at Stanford next week." Richard nodded. "William mentioned that. Pre-law, I believe. He apologized again for what happened last year," Elijah continued. "Said it was the wake-up call he needed." "People can change," Marilyn observed, glancing meaningfully at Richard, "when given the right motivation." Richard smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. The past year had transformed him as well, from a brilliant but isolated tech billionaire to a man reconnecting with the human elements of life. His relationship with Elijah had opened doors within himself that had been closed for decades. "Speaking of change," he said, "I've been meaning to tell you both. I'm establishing a new foundation focused on making advanced education accessible to gifted students from disadvantaged backgrounds." He looked at Marilyn. "I was hoping you might consider heading it up. Your experience as both an educator and a parent who navigated that system would be invaluable." Marilyn raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. "Me? I'm just a school librarian." "You're far more than that," Richard countered. "You raised an extraordinary son on limited resources, fought for his education against significant odds, and maintained your integrity throughout. That's exactly the perspective this foundation needs." Elijah nodded in agreement. "He's right, Mom. You always say the system is stacked against kids without money or connections. This could be a chance to change that." Marilyn considered the possibility, a new path opening before her that she had never imagined. "I'd want to finish the school year at Westridge," she said finally. "I wouldn't leave them in the middle of a term." "Of course," Richard agreed. "The foundation is still in the planning stages. We have time to do this right." As they continued walking, Elijah slightly ahead as he pointed out various campus landmarks, Richard spoke more quietly to Marilyn. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For raising him to be who he is. For being strong enough to do it alone. For being generous enough to let me into his life now, despite everything." He hesitated. "I know I can never make up for those 16 years, but I hope you know how grateful I am for this second chance." Marilyn studied the man beside her, so different from the ambitious young physicist who had once dismissed the possibility of fatherhood as an inconvenient complication. Time and experience had tempered his brilliance with wisdom, his confidence with humility. "We can't change the past," she said gently, "but we can choose how we move forward." Elijah has both of us now, supporting him in different ways. That's what matters. Ahead of them, Elijah turned, waiting for them to catch up. The afternoon sun caught the silver of the pocket watch chain visible at his vest pocket, the Harlow family heirloom now bearing a new equation of his own design alongside those of his father and grandfather. "Come on, you two," he called. "I'm starving, and they have the best clam chowder in Boston waiting for us." As they joined him, Marilyn reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a single mother struggling to provide opportunities for her gifted son, to a family redefined by truth and reconciliation. From a brilliant boy fighting false accusations, to a young scientist on the verge of transforming our understanding of the universe. It hadn't been an easy path. There had been pain and secrets, confrontation and revelation. But standing here now, watching her son walk confidently toward his future with both his parents beside him, Marilyn knew that sometimes the most difficult journeys led to the most meaningful destinations. The truth, once feared and hidden, had ultimately set them all free. What would you have done in Marilyn's position? Would you have kept the secret or revealed it sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of triumph against the odds.